Whenever I see a party-based RPG where the reserve characters don't receive experience, I think to myself, alright, now we've got something here. I'm all for offering more options, but choosing who to use isn't that meaningful of a choice if there's no cost. If there's no trade-off. If I can switch in a character that I haven't been using, and he can compete with the best of them, that feels off. It's part of why I drifted away from Pokemon after experience share was forced. These are role-playing games, or at least allegedly they are. And it doesn't feel like role-playing to swap in some guy that's been warming the bench for 20 hours and he's cleaning house. That power should be earned. See, through my eyes, if I run up against a roadblock and my current team isn't cutting it, I view that as a puzzle. How do I solve this puzzle? What do I gotta do to get my team up to snuff? What strategy do I need to consider? If I bothered to raise an archer to fight this ranged enemy, this would be an easy fight. But I didn't, so how do I deal with this now? Well, if my benched archer's been leveling up passively, it's not a puzzle anymore. Swap him in and problem solved. But if he hasn't been receiving free experience, then what do I do? Do I grind him up? Find a way for my current team to do the job? Start over? Now I've got questions to ask, but I'm not asking those questions when the game has built-in failsafes. Now if I'm not asking questions, that means I'm not really thinking. And if I'm not thinking, it's probably not all that interesting. Type-0 wants you to specialize in 3 characters out of a lineup of 14 because reserve characters don't level up. This serves as the foundational layer of the gameplay. Type-0 lets you cycle through all 14 characters during most missions, and it's only game over once every single one is dead. If that sounds generous, it would be if everyone leveled up equally, but it sounds much less generous when your core team is knocked out and you're left with the stragglers. And that creates a new objective in combat, winning with the rejects. The mission's almost over, I've got 2 guys left, and I haven't been leveling up either of them. Can I pull this off? That's a type of excitement that I can't say is all that common in the Final Fantasy series. But even with that consideration, 14 characters is a lot, which is where Type-0's difficulty comes into play. Bucking the trend of most Final Fantasies leaning towards the easy side, where you ride that breeze straight to the end, Type-0 has an oscillating difficulty curve. Sometimes it's mindless, sometimes it's pretty challenging, and team composition can push that scale one way or the other. Here's the catch. With 14 playable characters in an action game, all with distinct movesets, there was zero chance for parity. How do you balance melee fighters with ranged attackers and magic users in a game where the enemies don't change to reflect your loadout? You don't. And on top of the baseline difficulty, which by the way, the game recommends playing on easy, but I'd ignore that recommendation, there's a sort of sub-difficulty system integrated with the character choices. Each one has a distinct job identity, and you guys already know how I feel about the job system. This is the strongest appeal of Type-0 for me, finding the jobs that feel the most enjoyable to play with. And since that's the appeal, I think it's appropriate to cover each character in detail instead of generalizing them. It's fitting that the first character you're introduced to is one of the more well-rounded fighters. Ace's gimmick comes from drawing random cards from a deck. Some cards are used for offense, some inflict stop on enemies so you've got some crowd control there, and others restore health or MP, which means Ace is self-sustaining. That random aspect is key because it means Ace doesn't fall into a predictable loop. You're not going to get what you want every time, so you've got to adapt on the fly. Literally playing with the cards you're dealt, I love that. You can control this to an extent with his abilities that let you stack the deck in certain ways. If you favor attack-focused cards, you can equip Attack Hand. It adjusts the odds that you'll draw offensive cards, but it doesn't eliminate the random chance that you'll draw support or healing cards. His abilities don't erase the identity of his gimmick, that being drawing random cards. They steer it towards your preference. I really appreciate that design. With skill acquisition in RPGs, it's easy for jobs or classes to escalate to a point where the drawbacks cease to exist. Ace has the characteristics of a gambler class, except instead of the drawbacks being negative effects that harm you or your party, the drawbacks are, you get a buff when you wanted an attack. He doesn't stop being a gambler, so his identity is always clear. The question is, do you want a gambler on your team? A major consideration with party-based RPGs comes from team composition. Using all your favorite characters on a single team might not be viable if they're all melee fighters and you need a healer. Ace's versatility means he can be slotted into any team and he won't ever feel like a burden, provided you pilot him as opposed to the AI. When it comes to relying on party members, Just about the only thing you can reliably expect from them is the occasional cure spell. When the AI is controlling Ace, he's not going to go ham with magic spells and then fish for an MP restoration card so he can keep the cycle going. But when you're in the driver's seat, it's a different story. Poor party member AI is a frequent concern with RPGs, and I'm slowly coming to accept that this might not be such a bad thing. The AI is too strong. Why are you needed? You can hang back and let your team crush everything. But if the AI is too weak, why are they there? Aren't you just a glorified babysitter at that point? But weak AI can also force you to take action. Their stupidity makes you a better player. They're being hit by ranged enemies, throw up a shield to block the shots. If they're up close and taking a beating, cast a cure spell on them, or maybe step in and draw aggro. Combat in RPGs doesn't need to revolve around maintaining constant pressure, because we've got all these defensive options at our disposal. We should be making use of them. Why offer these options and never incentivize us to use them? I find myself asking that question way too often, to the point where it feels like most RPGs, they're designed with bloat out of obligation rather than deliberate design. 100 tools and you only use 5 of them. Challenging content forces you to consider your options, and as stupid as this is about to sound, poor party member AI is one way to increase the challenge. Am I justifying bad AI? Maybe a little bit, or at least in this case, I almost have to because the game is designed around you taking charge. You get these little requests that pop up during combat like kill 2 enemies or get a kill site. Only the character you're controlling can fulfill these requests, and the punishment for failing them is death. Not guaranteed death, you've got to play a little dodging minigame to avoid the insta-kill. If your allies were competent and scored kills before you were able to, this request system would be broken to the point where you'd never bother with it. The AI is incompetent on purpose. This doesn't seem like an oversight or underdeveloped part of the game, since it also feeds into the reserve system. You don't mind if your party members kick the bucket because you've got 14 characters to choose from, and their death is an opportunity for another character to gain experience. What steered me away from using Deuce the first time around, and I can't imagine I'm alone on this, is that her fighting style didn't look fun. I finally tried her out in this playthrough, and yeah, she's not fun to use. But she is effective. The way Deuce works is you hold the attack button and walk around while homing orbs attack everything that moves. There's nothing technical about her playstyle. It really is just walking around and watching stuff die. She's got a move that buffs your squad and forces them to attack the enemy you're locked onto. She looks like a support character, but her specialty is an offense, just in a passive way since she doesn't physically attack anything. I get that creating 14 distinct kits is challenging, not all of them are going to be winners, but passive characters like this don't really mesh all that well with action games. I want to get in the fight, not watch everyone else fight while I cheer them on. There needs to be a stronger incentive than usual to use this character. It's like, hey, do you want to play this game about war and death? You can use either this guy that dual wields guns, this dude that carries a 7-foot long lance, or the band geek that plays the flute. I also tried using Deuce during the real-time strategy segments. These missions in Type-0 are extremely simple. In fact, there's not much strategizing involved. This is a glorified minigame where you escort troops to capture strongholds and cities, and occasionally enter the cities to fight a few dudes. You've got unlimited troops, so there's no need to worry about resource management. Enemies can recapture strongholds, but there doesn't appear to be any penalty. There's no time limit, so you can take your sweet time. I'd complain what the point of these are since they rarely impose any sort of pressure. Not to mention you can skip these missions, but it's a minigame, not really a feature-rich mode. And it's not a bad one, just wish I had to employ some semblance of strategy. All of these have one obvious path to victory. The little spin with this is you can control a party member and confront enemies before your troops get to them. Clear a path for your guys to attack the strongholds because you can't do so yourself. Reminds me of Demon Chaos for the PS2. If you like these RTS missions in Type-0, maybe look into Demon Chaos. Thing with these action RTS games, Brutal Legend is another one, is that the strategy layer is deliberately simplified to accommodate the hack-and-slash combat. But the combat is also shallow enough that it doesn't replace the strategy portion. You've got two genres that taken individually aren't robust, but together, they're still not that great. I wish I enjoyed this minigame more, but it really does just feel too shallow. From my limited experience, Deuce doesn't seem like a great character to use for these. She can't buff anyone because these are solo missions, and she can't one-shot anything. She's technically not a melee fighter, but she still needs to be close enough to hit anything, which opens her up to counterattacks. If a unit attacks you, it's a guaranteed interrupt and knockdown, so ranged fighters are safer and more effective. Usually, not always, but usually in action games, if I have the choice between melee and ranged combat options, I stick with melee. Melee options tend to be better developed between the two. Devs have limitless creativity when it comes to fighting up close. You've got elaborate combos, enemies can counter you, you gotta parry attacks or dodge out of danger, but that doesn't seem to be the case with ranged combat, which is why so many games tend to use ammo or they nerf your ranged options. Trey's restriction doesn't come from limited ammo, it comes from charging his shots. If you want to deal big damage, you've got to run around charging for a while instead of spamming little pot shots. He feels like the real-time version of the Archer class from Final Fantasy Tactics. In Tactics, the main progression for Archer was unlocking different tiers of the charge skill. The higher the charge level, the more time it'd take to charge an attack, and the trade-off is you deal more damage. For a turn-based game, it's extremely weak. All that time is wasted because other jobs can deal huge damage immediately instead of waiting. Waiting made sense for area of effect attacks from jobs like Summoner, not for a single target strike. In Type-0, that time spent charging isn't wasted. You can move around while charging so you can take cover or run around enemies to distract them, and the damage you deal relative to other classes in that same time span isn't this substantial chasm like it is in Tactics. But the biggest strength from Trey comes from the central damage dealing mechanic of the game. Break sites and kill sites, which are these yellow and red circles. Attacking while a yellow circle is active will shave off a huge chunk of health. This game has that Kingdom Hearts style of colored health bars, and the more health an enemy has, the more likely break sites will appear. Attacking while a red circle is active is an instant kill. These appear when enemies and bosses are low on health. Because these circles are transient, you've only got a short window to land the hit. Let's piece together who the ideal character is to take advantage of this mechanic. Reaction time is critical. This character needs to have low latency, so anyone with a slow weapon is out. And since the attack needs to land, it's better to have a ranged fighter since they don't need to be right next to an enemy when the circle appears. I think you get where I'm going with this. Ranged attackers that strike fast are the superior choice in this game. Trey has no problem landing break sites and kill sites constantly. One of the safest ways to play this game is to charge a shot, then run back and forth to bait a break site. You move slower while charging, but you're still fast enough to sidestep most attacks. Even discounting the break site kill site mechanic, some enemies can only be hit from a range, so you want a ranged attacker in your party anyway. Coming into Type-0, I was expecting the ranged fighters to be underpowered or clunky to use. They wound up being some of the strongest choices. Remember at the beginning when I said this game has sub-difficulty levels? If you want to score the easiest kill sites, pick the ranged fighters. They're not the most fun characters to use since you're essentially fishing for instant kill parries, but I know there are players that love that sort of playstyle. For me, the biggest drawback with ranged combat comes from the lock-on system. Talked about this several years ago with Dirge of Cerberus, and again last year with the Third Birthday. Lock-on combat, at least when Square Enix does it, is almost always one-dimensional. The enemies rarely have an answer to hiding behind cover and pressing one button to chip away at them. When you're aiming, the time it takes to maneuver your camera leaves you susceptible to damage. An enemy can either charge at you or attack while you're lining up a shot, but with lock-on, that window is erased. I like how Sin and Punishment 2 handle this, because if you use lock-on shot in that game, you deal much less damage. Lock-on is better suited for aiming redirected missiles. Lock-on exists here because this was made for the PSP. Sony wanted to offer console-quality gaming on the go, but they didn't want to incorporate dual analog controls. Without that second stick, you either need to forsake a manually controllable camera or use two buttons, that being L and R, to get the job done. Making an action game on this handheld, and with 14 different characters, was an ambitious undertaking. Square tried so hard to make action combat work on the PSP. Between this, Crisis Core, The Third Birthday, Dissidia, I've played all of them, and if I were to judge them based solely on the action combat and nothing else, Dissidia Duodecim is my favorite. But as an RPG, Type-0 takes the lead. This character gave me a Vietnam flashback. Replaying The Third Birthday last year helped me realize that Type-0 is essentially the same game, but improved in almost every way. It's the same director making the same genre of game on the same console, so this was his second chance to get it right. Cater is the closest comparison to Aya, but she does have a few traits that set her apart. Cater's main gimmick is her gun charges when you're not attacking. But the way this was implemented needed some refinement. She's supposed to work like Trey, just instead of holding a button to charge, you hold nothing. But this method doesn't feel as smooth. Getting hit cancels the charge, and you can't store the charge for later. Seems like that would be the advantage of charging the attack passively. Instead, if you want to fire a normal shot and you've got a charged one in the chamber, you don't have a choice, you're firing the charged shot. With Trey, charging is a deliberate action. You need to hold the attack button, so there's no question that you want to fire a charged shot. Charged shots are slow and have weak tracking, so they're not even all that great to begin with. Plus she ends her normal combo string with a charged shot anyway. They have a high stagger property, but I can't think of an instance where using a charged shot was worth it over holding down attack, especially since she's more likely to hit break sites when you're spamming. She's the opposite of Trey. Trey wants to charge shots and bait out break sites for huge damage, and Cater wants to rapid fire to catch the break sites without any prediction. Her kit also feels a little lacking. Her debuff shot that lowers defense doesn't seem to do much of anything. There's no reason to use this against normal enemies that are around your level. You definitely don't want to use this against enemies that outlevel you. If you're going to fight those, you're going to rely on break sites. And it's hard to tell what it does against bosses. I can't tell if the debuff sticks or for how long it lasts. If it does stick, I can't even tell that I'm dealing more damage. Status effects in general don't seem all that worthwhile because of the existence of break sites. She's also got an elemental shot, which means you can strike weaknesses without expending MP. And that sounds cool until you realize that MP isn't an issue in this game. I'll cover magic in detail later, but the short of it is, because this was originally a PSP game, it was designed for short play sessions. This means there are save points and full heal zones every few screens. You can play for 5 minutes and bail, and the game refreshes your health and MP at these checkpoints, so you've got a clean slate when you come back. You're not meant to ration MP over the course of a long mission. There's also no restriction on item use, and the game hands out ethers, elixirs, and even mega elixirs like they're candy. You can stack MP boosting accessories that are all easy to come by. Early on I snagged MP plus 40%, and it stacks with other MP boosting accessories. Later on you get stuff like MP plus 60%, and accessories that boost HP and MP together. If this game were stingy with MP, using the elemental shots would feel practical. Instead, Cater's better off equipping magic like everyone else. It's more powerful anyway. Balance doesn't seem to chart high on the list of priorities for RPG devs. So many of these skills exist because someone went, wouldn't it be cool if these bullets did different types of magic damage depending on the direction you press the button? And yeah, that is cool, but at some point my desire for practicality will outpace my desire to win with underpowered moves. I like that these choices exist, not asking for them to go away, but I like a little more incentive to use them. There's a well-known stereotype with weapon design. Small weapons hit fast but don't deal much damage, and large weapons are slow and hit hard. That's a basic type of balancing, but it doesn't work in Type-0 because the break sight system becomes more relevant the more you play it. You've either got to use low latency attacks to hit them, or have good prediction skills. Cinque has the slowest basic attack animation in the game, which means she's the most difficult to hit break sights with. If I hit them, it's by accident. I feel punished for choosing her because her design doesn't mesh well with this mechanic. It's not impossible to use her, but it takes more effort than anyone else, and I don't think that payoff is worth it. Heavy weapons change your approach to combat from reactive to predictive. Because swinging your weapon is a huge commitment, you want to ensure it'll hit and that you won't be interrupted, and oftentimes that means predicting when an enemy will attack. Some enemies attack so fast that by the time you recognize the animation and want to react, it's too late. When your weapon swings this slow, you wind up whiffing, and missing an attack hurts so much, it's enough to dissuade me from using these weapons. I don't mind being punished for using a bad strategy, for having bad positioning, rolling off a ledge, pulling too many enemies, pretty much anything except missing an attack. Missing with Cinque hurts so much more than any other unit. If I'm using her, I've already forsaken my ability to reliably hit break sites. Alright, I can compensate for that with super powerful hits and ignore break sites. But some of these units hover out of melee reach, and others zip around the battlefield. Cinque's fighting an uphill battle the entire game trying to hit these things. But she does have a nice ability interaction. Earthquake stuns in an area of effect, and that stun lasts for a while. You can follow up with a good old spin to win move to kill everything without worrying about break sites. For most of these characters, their abilities feel designed in a vacuum. They don't synergize with other abilities. They're meant to be useful on their own, and that works because you've only got 2 slots. Cinque is one of the few where I don't mind giving up magic to rock 2 abilities. If I want to use magic, I'll use someone else. Better to capitalize at what Cinque excels at than patch her up with a band-aid. Directional attacks exist for most characters, which is a good way of adding combat options with limited buttons on the controller. But blow is an important consideration. Death by Degrees relies entirely on directional attacks, but it goes overboard with double tapping the stick, moving it back and forth, flicking it versus holding it. Sice keeps it simple. Her attacks pull her in the direction you're moving the stick. The animation is a little slow, but you're moving around quite a bit. It helps with positioning, so even if you whiff, at least you're whiffing in a good spot. What makes Sice disorienting to use is not only do her attacks move her around, the lock-on camera is aggressive. Another concession made because of the PSP hardware. When you lock on, the enemy is always centered, and the camera will violently whip around to track them. In an open field, not an issue, but in confined spaces or if you're near a wall, the camera works against you. The exact same issue with the third birthday. Playing games with these types of cameras makes me long for fixed perspectives. When Type-0 HD first came out, this issue was compounded with forced, extremely obnoxious motion blur, which was thankfully patched out long ago. They tried to mask the low-quality textures, since the only thing HD about this port are the character models for the playable characters. Everything else uses the original PSP assets, and if you blur those textures with a giant screen-wide smear thanks to motion blur, you won't notice their low quality. And yeah, that works, just, I'm also looking at a giant smear on the screen. I didn't start using Sice until New Game Plus when you unlock Code Crimson missions. These replace the main story missions and are balanced around New Game Plus levels, which makes them great for leveling up neglected characters. The game has elements in place to help you with the grind. There's an accessory that doubles experience, some chapters give you a huge chunk of free experience for the entire team to help normalize their levels. You can chain random encounters on the field, which is one of my favorite features. You're prompted if you want to keep going, and the next encounter levels up the enemies. The more you chain, the higher their level scale, but you can't chain forever. I think it caps at 5 or 6 battles. It's not trying to be an unbearable grind, though it absolutely embodies the grinding spirit of older RPGs. When you've been a part of this hobby for long enough, you notice a shift in mentality over the years. It's so gradual as to be imperceptible in the moment. Then one day you wake up and wonder when everyone changed their attitude. Things like random encounters and grinding were staples of RPGs. People played these games for the gameplay, but lately I'm seeing newcomers to RPGs play these games for the story. That's the allure, and they won't tolerate random battles or difficulty spikes that encourage grinding. Look at the modern state of Final Fantasy to see this applied to game development. We haven't had a mainline numbered title with random battles since 10 and 10-2. Those were also the last mainline games where it felt like grinding naturally fit into progression. That was over 20 years ago. 12 doesn't require grinding. 13 hard caps your Crystarium progression chapter by chapter. 15 and 16 are action games that minimize the RPG layer. The only time where it felt like grinding was worthwhile in 15 was for the optional content, and 16 is barely an RPG at all. Type-0 has action combat, but it's still firmly rooted in RPG progression. The series had yet to shake off its RPG identity at this point, which is why I think older fans are more likely to appreciate Type-0 than newer ones. The next 3 characters use the English names for numbers. In Japanese, these characters are literally called 7, 8, and 9. It's a direct translation. Maybe it sounds exotic in Japanese like the rest of the names, but it sounds silly in English. We're going from Deuce and Cinque to 7. If Japan's going to use English names for these characters, why not give them Japanese names for the localization? That seems like it'd fit the spirit of a localization better. 7's a character I saved for New Game Plus, and I regret that because she's got a fun playstyle. Her weapon is a whip that extends from a sword, kinda like Ivy from Soul Calibur, but I don't think she ever uses it in sword form. It's more of a visual thing than a practical one. Final Fantasy is no stranger to impractical weapons, and I think that's something missing from games like 15 and 16. Starting to miss weapons like the Gunblade, Blitzball, Kate Sith's Megaphone. Even 13 had silly weapons. Lightning's got a Gunblade, Hope's got a Boomerang, and Vanille's got whatever this is. 7's main ability is Snakebite, which not only comes out fast enough to hit break sites, it's got utility. Once you latch on, you can send out a pulse that can also nail break sites, but even if it doesn't, it has a chance to stun the enemy. You can also pull them towards you or launch yourself at them. both of which are great positioning options. She's great at crowd control, even her basic attack hits a wide range. Crowd control is an integral part of action games, and I don't think enough devs lean into this. Boss fights typically revolve around fighting one enemy, and that ignores so much of a character's utility. Being able to land status effects, or pierce through enemies, or attack several at once, none of that's employed when you're fighting one target. These movesets shine when you're surrounded by enemies, but your ability to use those crowd control tools isn't tested when you're up against a single foe. The most interesting boss fights are ones that encourage you to switch up your strategies so you're not just dodging and punishing. Call them gimmick fights if you want, but I don't correlate the word gimmick with bad. Demon's Souls has gimmicky boss fights, and that makes each one memorable. Yeah, not all of them are challenging, but at least they stand out. FromSoft's boss design philosophy shifted over the years, minimizing the gimmicks. Nowadays, so many revolve around dodging and punishing, and since every modern action RPG copies FromSoft, they designed their bosses in the same way. Players seem to love that type of design, so I won't say this was a bad change, but it's certainly moving away from what I admired about the older games. To Type-0's credit, most of the encounters involve fighting multiple targets. Bosses aren't common, most missions are capped off with elite targets, which are glorified regular enemies surrounded by minions, which means someone like 7 can stay worthwhile the entire game. The older I get, the more I'm starting to appreciate brawler and monk type characters. What makes 8 such a fun character to use is his gameplay identity not only feels distinct from everyone else, it's also well realized. You got different stances, but you're not shifting in and out of them as a passive state. You're pressing a direction alongside the stance button to send out different attacks. Each one has a distinct application, so it's not a matter of using whichever looks cool. Down plus Swiftwind stance is a ground pound meteor strike that works as a sort of crowd control. Down plus Wildfire stance plants a flame pillar that deals magic damage. Unlike Cater, where it feels more appropriate to equip magic, you probably want to equip 2 different stances on 8, leaving no room for magic. Having a coverage attack to fight something like a slime works better here, because that magic attack comes bundled with other moves, and not dedicating a slot for one niche application. What I would have liked to see is a way to link his stance attacks to create elaborate combos. There's no juggling, but the way 8 fights makes me wish there was. He's got a robust enough moveset to carry this entire game by himself, just needs some enemies to be designed around his kit. But I'm not going to count that against the game because adding juggling would make Type-0 something it's not. And an important lesson I've learned over the years is to avoid that trap. When I discuss game design and balance, I try, but don't always succeed, to judge these elements in the context of whichever game I'm talking about. I wouldn't say a Zelda game needs more weapon choices and a stronger sense of character growth. Zelda isn't trying to be that game. I will judge Zelda on its puzzle design and sense of exploration, because that's what the series is about. Likewise, I'm not going to say an action RPG needs more puzzles. As much as I'd love for that to be the case, that's not an intrinsic quality of the genre. An RPG doesn't need puzzles to be an RPG, but if an RPG does have puzzles, you better believe I'm judging them. I guess a simple generalization would be, I'd like to judge a game for what it does rather than what it leaves out, but that's not a hard and fast rule. Would it make sense to say a visual novel needs more romance options? If it's not a romance novel, then no. But if a visual novel is missing a feature, like if it's missing a skip previously read dialogue option, that feels like a fair criticism. With an RPG, I wouldn't say, my favorite genre is RTS, this needs an RTS minigame, I'm counting that against the game. But because an RTS minigame is present in Type-0, judging its inclusion is fair game. I'm judging what the game's presenting me. Action combat's a little tricky to discuss because an action game doesn't need juggles or parries or cancels to be considered an action game. Those are elements a dev can incorporate, and they certainly add a welcome layer of depth, but they're not mandatory features of action combat. The only thing action combat needs to be considered action combat is real-time movement and attacking. You don't even need a block or guard to be an action game. The layers you build on top of that foundation transform your game into something distinct, and while every action game is building off the same base template, they're not all trying to accomplish the same goal. This is where the pitfall lies, because I know there are people that'll say, well, if an action game doesn't have juggles or cancels, it probably sucks. Their preference for certain types of action combat influences their judgment of games that aren't trying to be that action game. Type-0 doesn't have juggles. Does that mean it sucks? There's someone out there right now that's saying yes, but given the context of Type-0's identity, that being 14 distinct characters, Not everyone is well suited for juggling. Trey would be abysmal at juggle combat. Slow characters like Cinque and Jack would also struggle. Because Type-0 doesn't revolve around juggles or cancels, that gives the devs leeway to experiment with a greater variety of gameplay styles. That is the point here, variety, because it's not just an action game, it's an action RPG. When I say I'd like for 8 to juggle enemies, it's because his kit feels suitable for that type of gameplay. Being able to engage in combat in that way would make him more satisfying to play as. But I understand that changing enemy behaviors to accommodate one character would disturb the balance. It's close to impossible to balance a game equally around 14 characters, where everyone fights the same enemies. Devs have a hard enough time balancing games with one playable character. I still enjoy playing as 8, and I accept that the things that would make him even more enjoyable to use can't exist in Type-0. I can say the same about pretty much every character. I enjoy and dislike them for what they are, rather than for what they can be. Lancer in Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre is one of my favorite jobs, and that might be due to the turn-based nature of those games, because the Lancer unit in Type-0 is one of my least favorite. This boils down to the application of the spear. In a turn-based game, the spear has a longer range than other melee weapons. It can hit a unit 2 spaces away. Because units have a movement limit, that spear essentially functions as a +1 to movement. It's actually better than that because it can hit 2 enemies at once. Height also matters in those games, and you can bypass height restrictions by jumping. There's another interesting interaction because friendly fire exists in Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre. If a friendly unit is between you and an enemy, you can hit the enemy at the cost of hitting your ally. I know players don't care about friendly fire, but you've got to admit that it encourages more strategic play. I see the value in that. In Type-0, there's no movement limit because it's not turn-based. Melee weapon size isn't an exclusive benefit because some characters can lunge while attacking. Every battle is fought on flat terrain, so jumping has a less practical application. Friendly fire is non-existent. Everything that made Lancers interesting is absent, so 9's Lancer identity doesn't shine. He's still a good fighter, but that's not what I'm getting at. The one thing that's synonymous with Lancers is jumping. That's their main gimmick. 9 can jump, therefore he's a Lancer, not arguing that. But his ability to jump means nothing if I'm not incentivized to use it, if I don't want to use it. You're invincible while jumping, it does pretty good damage and it has some decent range. It's not useless, but is it any more efficient than dodging and landing kill sites? The kill site mechanic discourages the use of so many abilities in this game, because every time I'm considering a damage dealing ability, I have to ask myself if it has better utility than my basic attack. 9 can hit kill sites easily with his basic attack, so why not use that over jumping, which is slower, takes up a slot, and uses AP. I'll add this little asterisk. Just because Lancers are known for jumping, doesn't mean they have to jump. Take away jumping in Final Fantasy Tactics and the Lancers are still distinct units. If you take away 9's jump, is he still a Lancer? I'd say yes. The range of his melee attacks doesn't feel very Lancer-like, but he can throw the lance, which satisfies that reach aspect. On top of dealing decent damage, it can strike kill sites from a distance, which makes it more relevant than jump. 9 feels like a better choice for a solo character run as opposed to rolling with a team. That consideration went into designing the kits for a lot of these characters, because the hardest difficulty restricts you to using one character per mission. Why would I want to use Lance Throw to hit from a range if I've got a ranged unit that can nail those all day long? Well, what if I don't have access to those units? You start to appreciate some of these abilities more when you play with restrictions, and that's a subject I covered with other Final Fantasies. This series is at its most entertaining when the tools you've come to rely on are taken away. In Final Fantasy IX, the first 3 discs switch party members around constantly, so you can't get too comfortable with certain units. You've got to learn the strengths of everyone. Type-0, with its huge cast, would have benefited from that kind of design. I wish there were more missions that split your team up, which does happen, just not all that often. There's a system in place that encourages using certain units for missions, highlighting them in yellow and giving them a few buffs, but it's never enforced, so you can ignore it. There are 2 sequential chapters that give you the illusion of splitting the team up, but after you complete the first of those chapters, all those units reunite with the second group. The final dungeon is the only story instance where your team is split into 2 distinct groups, and each team tackles exclusive challenges. You switch back and forth to make progress. Feels reminiscent of Final Fantasy VI's final dungeon, and I would have loved to see more dungeons designed that way. I get wanting to give the player the freedom to use anyone, but take advantage of this huge cast. Give us more dungeons that require splitting them apart. It's not until you reach New Game Plus where you'll get exclusive story missions that shake up the approach to mission design. These are far and away the most interesting missions in the game, and I've seen this type of design in the past with the Drakengard and Armored Core series. New Game Plus unveils more of the story and presents new challenges. That's the kind of New Game Plus I want to play, when there are enough changes to make that second lap feel fresh, not when you're running through the same content with an overpowered team. I wouldn't even call New Game Plus in Type-0 New Game Plus. It feels like an essential part of the story. First time I played this, Jack was benched. He moved slow with his sword drawn and I wasn't having that. Second time I played this, he stayed benched. Then I decided to make this video, so I had to learn how each character worked. I booted up mission mode to give him a spin. Type-0 has an option on the menu that cuts the fat and lets you replay story and side missions, taking you right into the action. Why would you want to do this? Well, it's a great way to grind experience and try missions on a harder difficulty. But past that, this game has a ranking system. I'll cover how ranking works later. In this instance, I wanted to see how Jack fared in a practical combat setting. Here's the bottom line. Jack is one of the strongest characters in the game, but he's not my favorite to use. I like him, but he's not my favorite. Jack's kit revolves around counters, either through baiting an attack and punishing, or through his abilities that essentially work as parries. Gotcha! Might not be a popular opinion, but I've gotten so fatigued from parry-based combat in the past few years, and I'll tell you why. Parrying, dodging, and moving out of danger share a common goal: preventing damage. That's their function, they're functionally identical. The routes they go about accomplishing that goal require different types of player input, so they're mechanically distinct. The function of parrying isn't what I'm fatigued by, it's the mechanic. My issue isn't that this is a bad system. My issue is that this system frequently ignores an important aspect of real-time gameplay, that being movement. What are you doing during combat in an action game? Moving and taking action either through jumping, attacking, or another type of interaction. But the movement half of the equation is always present, and it's a consideration that's either ignored or minimized when you can plant your feet and bait parries. So many games that employ parries as a core element of combat involve locking onto your target, waiting for a specific animation, standing still, and parrying it. Jack works the same way. He moves slowly with his sword drawn, and you can't cancel the end lag from his attacks with a dodge, which means he's designed to encourage counters. On one hand, that's good, he's got a distinct identity, and you're incentivized to play him in a specific way. I like that. On the other, this proves that the positioning factor isn't involved with parrying. That movement element of gameplay is neutered with Jack more than any other character, along with the depth it brings. When an enemy attacks and you can't block or parry it, you instead need to dodge or move out of the way. Unlike parrying where you're put at an advantage when you're successful, you're not put at an advantage when you dodge or move. You can be, but it's not a guarantee. There's nuance here. Staying far away from an enemy means you've got a better chance to avoid an attack, but there's less opportunity to capitalize on the opening afforded after they attack. With parrying, there is no bad position. If you're close to an enemy and he doesn't attack you can parry, you learn the timing and parry it. You don't need to readjust your position. What these games do to force movement is they incorporate unparryable attacks. But how can you make the distinction between what you can and can't parry? Usually there's a sign. In some games an enemy will glow a certain way when they're performing an attack you can't parry. Instead of movement being a natural dynamic in combat, it's a tool that you use when the game tells you to use it. To further compensate for his slow movement, Jack's basic attack comes out quickly. You can take advantage of this because some enemies' break sites and kill sites appear for a few frames after they attack. If you block the hit, Jack's attack comes out quick enough to punish and execute the break site. Just need to make sure you're close enough to land the hit, since his hitbox is pretty small. Of course I say this whole spiel about parrying, but I don't hate it, and I don't hate Jack. Like I said, I'm fatigued by how prevalent parrying's become in action games. I want to see some variety, and Type-0 offers that. If I don't want to parry, I won't use Jack. If I'm in the mood to counter everything, I have that option. That's the benefit of having access to all these different playstyles. The game's not balanced around everyone, which is the major trade-off, but I'm also playing an RPG. Expectations of balance went out the window 30 years ago. Queen doesn't have any obvious shortcomings, which is why I used her quite a bit on my first playthrough. She's a great choice to learn the game with because her basic attack is a lunge that has a big hitbox, making it easy to land kill sites. She can also easily cancel attacks into magic. Every character in the game can magic cancel, but it feels easier with certain characters like Queen. Tabata, the director of Final Fantasy Type-0 and 15, wanted to shake up the way magic works. I don't think he did a remarkable job in either game. Magic isn't generalized in Type-0. There's no catch-all magic menu you can rely on during combat. You can't even equip fields of magic like fire and ice. You have to equip specific spells within each field, and each one takes up a slot, meaning at most you can equip 2 spells on a character, and that's only if you unlock their ability that lets them equip 2 spells. You can upgrade spells, but not only does each one need to be upgraded separately, there are different traits within each spell that you can adjust. The resources needed to upgrade these traits are color specific, which is a resource you harvest through an extremely tedious mechanic where you absorb corpses. Later on you unlock tier 2 spells, which don't replace tier 1 spells, which means they have their own upgrades and occupy their own slots. This system isn't difficult to understand. In fact, it's easy enough to grasp almost immediately. My complaint is there are too many steps involved in this process. If I want to upgrade Blizzard Bomb, I can't just make it stronger. I need to choose what to boost, and I can't just boost power because buffing one trait debuffs another. And what about MP cost and cast time? Those are important considerations. I better level those up. Well, now I'm dumping all my resources into one spell. What about the other 4 ice spells? I don't feel like it's worth the resources to upgrade everything evenly because then everything feels weak. And it's not worth the time farming resources to upgrade a whole bunch of spells when I can only equip 2 at most. And more commonly it's going to be 1 or 0 since I want to use the character's specific abilities. It's better to boost 1 spell and have everyone use that. In my experience, the various projectile spells aren't worth the investment. Bomb is an area of effect spell that hits hard enough, so that's what I focused on, then I wound up ignoring most of the other offensive spells. If you play for long enough, you'll unlock Ultima and that replaces everything else. For how involved this system is, it's remarkably easy to ignore. And I'll revisit this subject later on when I talk about spellcrafting in Final Fantasy 15. Another ranged attacker, this time with a lemon twist. Trey and Cater don't need to worry about ammo. King does, and the trade-off is that his projectiles fire faster than anyone else's. The bullets don't deal a ton of damage, but when you're hitting break sites and kill sites left and right, that doesn't matter. King's basic attack is so powerful in the context of this system that it's enough to make him one of the better fighters in spite of his lackluster kit. Because he can land kill sites so easily, he's quick to unlock the higher tier weapons, meaning he can slip ahead of everyone else with minimal grinding. For each character, you can purchase some of their strongest weapons after striking 200 and then 300 kill sites. Landing 300 kill sites with Cinque is an endurance match, but it doesn't take much time at all with King. I don't like that you can obtain some of the strongest weapons this way, and it highlights my problem with the vertical equipment progression. If I've got a dinky sword with 3 attack, and I stumble into a sword with 50, either through a quest or I found it in a hidden chest, that feels like a significant upgrade. It's exciting in the moment, but from that point on, as I play through the game and grab all the in-between weapons, the ones between 3 and 50 attack, they feel like useless pickups. I have no reason to use them, so it amounts to item bloat, just junk I sell for money. Even if I don't get a high-level weapon early on, that vertical equipment climb means the weaker stuff eventually becomes outdated, and I wind up tossing them eventually. If weapons have value beyond raw stats, like if they come packaged with unique traits or abilities, you're afforded greater build flexibility. That's a reason to hoard gear. In Type-0, for some weapons on some characters, the characters come with small bonuses like they'll boost HP or MP. For the weaker weapons where the difference between attack is 3 or 5 points, that bonus feels like a worthwhile trade-off. But that ceases to be the case when you've got a weapon with 40 attack points over everything else. Specifically for the 300 kill site weapons, they come bundled with double experience. You're incentivized to get them as soon as possible if you want to minimize grinding. The hardest difficulty boosts every enemy's level by 50, so being able to cut back on that grind is appreciated. It's just a shame that the weapon progression ceases to be a consideration at that point. What makes King such an interesting unit in my eyes is his defining characteristic is a drawback. For someone like 8, the gimmick is he has different stances. Sice's gimmick is she deals more damage the longer she goes without getting hit. With King, what's his defining trait? It's not attacking from a range, there are other characters that can do that. His gimmick is ammo management. It's reloading and being susceptible to damage during the reload. His skills also play into this ammo management. Point blank shot asks you to get right up to an enemy to deal more damage, and I like the idea here. Get the ranged attacker close to danger for a huge payoff. It's a cool contrast, but I don't think I ever found a practical use for this skill. That's sadly the case for most of the cast. I haven't used half the skills in this game, for one because there are so many, and for another, I never felt a reason to use them. King can unlock a skill called Iron Will. It lets you survive lethal damage. Why would I waste an ability slot on that? If I'm in danger of dying, I can use a potion, cast Cure, or retreat a screen, stow my weapon, and let my HP naturally regenerate. One of these characters gives everyone in the party re-raise. Like I said in my job system video, you've got to establish some self-imposed rules to make the most out of everything. If you do a solo character run, just playing as King and no one else, maybe Iron Will would see some use. I can't imagine that was the consideration for designing this move, but at least it's not useless. Still think it'd be better to give King something with better utility, maybe a spell. I get wanting to avoid redundancy with each character, but in that quest to make everyone unique, some characters became saddled with scraps that really ought to have been left on the cutting room floor. One of King's better skills is called Endless Waltz, and it lasts until you run out of ammo. Once you snag the magazine upgrades, you indirectly buff the skill, which is a neat interaction. The caveat with this move is it comes with some serious end lag that you can't cancel out of, and any attack will stagger you. As powerful as it is, it's not something you can spam, and it seems like that was the major consideration with designing this character, kneecapping him so he never crosses the line into broken. That also means he's not that much fun to use. He's a simple, safe character that gets the job done. But when you're sharing the spotlight with more creative weapon choices, it's hard to settle on King. And then there's Rem. She has an ability that casts re-raise on the entire party. It doesn't cost MP, it costs AP, which is replenished with melee attacks. Re-raise disrupts a core building block of the game, that being replacing dead characters with reserve members. Phoenix Down and Pinions also disturb that balance, but as far as I'm aware, you can't buy those, they're quest rewards. Their limited quantity is deliberate and feeds into the harsh penalty of having a character die. Being able to cast re-raise infinitely bypasses this aspect. Where re-raise truly becomes absurd is with the mechanics of summoning. To summon an Eidolon, you need to sacrifice a character, again feeding into that central element. With re-raise, you get to summon for free, there's no cost. Summons can be used for a short period before needing to be resummoned, which requires another sacrifice. You can see how being able to cast re-raise at no cost is a huge blow against the game's challenge. At around the 3/4 mark, you'll unlock Odin, who is powerful enough to solo missions. Cast re-raise, summon Odin, wipe the screen, and if the mission isn't over, just repeat this loop. The other summons are also strong, just not as strong. In the expert trials, so named because the enemy levels are scaled much higher than the story missions, you can use this re-raise summon interaction to crush the difficulty. The expert trials are an awesome inclusion because of how you can choose to approach them. Either go in under-leveled and rely on kill sites to win, which is tough, grind for hours to match the level suggestion, or save them for New Game Plus when your levels will naturally catch up, or just cheese them with summons like Odin. But even that's not viable for every mission. One of the earlier ones restricts you from using magic and summons. I can't state enough how much I adore mission design that restricts your choices and forces you to consider new strategies. This leads into what I think is an interesting question. Do you play games to beat them, or to have fun? This isn't a trick question, there's no right or wrong answer, and it can be different for every game. It can even be different for each playthrough of the same game. Is a game something you beat and move on, or are you looking to get more out of it than a credits screen? Type-0 uses a ranking system for missions, and one of the conditions to get an S rank is you can't let a single character die. A character revived through re-raise counts as a death. Summoning an Eidolon, even with re-raise active, counts as a death. If you want an S rank, you've got to earn it. In fact, the easiest way to get S ranks is to play through missions solo without dying. You get a bonus for playing a mission solo. This is where Type-0 tries to re-inject some of that challenge. But it's not a compulsory challenge, it's optional. To get a taste of it, it's up to the player to balance the game. Do you want a gun for S ranks or will any rank do? Because if you don't care about ranks, the game is easy. If all you want to do is beat the game, you're forsaking some of its best qualities. But why should that challenge be optional? Why can't the mandatory content force me to consider my options in a similar way? Why should a player be in charge of balancing the game? Isn't that the job of the gameplay designers? These are hypothetical questions, I don't have an answer for them. Part of the eternal struggle with RPGs is designing them to be enjoyable for casuals and genre enthusiasts. It's just that the enthusiasts need to play with restrictions or play for longer to reach the content they seek, while the casuals can have fun from start to finish. That disparity is part of the reason why I make videos talking about RPGs. I like to see why a game does what it does, and if it works for me. With mainstream RPGs, and certainly anything Square Enix produces, I accept that the casual audience is the main audience. They're not looking for a hardcore challenge, they don't care about balance, and they're not likely to replay these games. They're fans all the same, but I can't help but think how much more enjoyable these games would be if they were made for enthusiasts rather than players that just want to beat a game once and move on. I didn't use Machina much at all. Don't like his character, don't like his moveset, and don't like his availability. He's unusable for several missions, which makes investing in him feel like a waste. Both he and Rem are unusable in the final dungeon, and all of this makes sense for story reasons, but it also dissuades me from spending too much time with them. And this availability issue wouldn't even be an issue if everyone had irregular availability. In Persona 3, for example, units can be preoccupied or they can get sick from too much dungeon crawling, and that encourages you to use other units. His kit is also underwhelming, and I can't tell what job role he's trying to fulfill. All of his skills amount to straightforward damage dealing, just with slight variations. One heals, another has a lingering hitbox, one stuns sometimes. Nothing that other characters can't already do, and do better. Even Cinque, if I want to stun enemies, I'd rather use her earthquake skill. Where the devs took a huge misstep with Machina is he's deliberately portrayed as an angsty, unlikable character from start to finish, with zero redemption unless you read the datalog. Pages and pages upon endless pages of backstory and cutscenes to tell you everything you didn't want to know. This crutch is the excuse used to justify the vague storytelling of Type-0, the Third Birthday, another Tabata joint, Final Fantasy XV, another Tabata joint, and the 13 trilogy. Not a Tabata joint, but Type-0 shares the same universe. I'm extremely critical of the storytelling in every single one of these games, because for all the hours spent watching cutscenes, these games end with giant gaping holes in their narratives. If you want to spackle them up, spend a few hours reading the in-game encyclopedia. I don't play games to read dictionary entries. Type-0's biggest sin, shockingly, isn't the datalog, it's the ending. After you complete Act 7, the game suddenly skips over an enormous plot point and instead spends 10 minutes narrating what happened off-screen. The classic Xenogears Disc 2 approach where they ran out of time and needed to wrap things up. This was an overambitious title in terms of scope, just like Xenogears, and just like Final Fantasy XV. Tabata's an interesting man because I can feel his passion for creating huge, sprawling universes. He doesn't want to bog the pacing with too many cutscenes, instead making a large chunk of the storytelling optional. But that approach makes me want to not bother with the story at all. He leaves out too many crucial plot points, and the way you go about learning those plot points doesn't take advantage of this medium. I don't want to watch a full-blown movie or watch an anime miniseries to learn more about Final Fantasy XV's story. I don't want to spend an hour reading disparate lore entries from a menu. That's not an entertaining use of my time. And after all that reading, there's still no guarantee that any of this will make sense. Type-0 took up 2 UMDs on the PSP. It was already a huge game by PSP standards, so going even further with more cutscenes and missions would have been excessive. Not just for the pacing, but for the development. This was supposed to be a portable entry, not a substantial mainline title for consoles. Something needed to be cut to hit the deadline, and that becomes obvious as you wrap up the playthrough. Type-0 is a victim of rushed development, just like its sibling Final Fantasy XV, and that's an unfortunate mark against its legacy. As you can guess by now, I have no intention of discussing my thoughts on the story. It's not a reason to play this game, and even if it were, I think it's ludicrous to expect players to read the datalog and beat the game twice to get even a basic understanding. The story isn't the reason why I like Type-0 and wanted to talk about it. It's the gameplay. The gameplay here is more enjoyable than I think any mainline Final Fantasy released after 12. It really nails the spirit of Final Fantasy with its overworld, huge cast of playable characters, reasonably paced length, and more optional content than story content. There's even a controllable airship here, but it's tucked at the end of an optional dungeon on the opposite side of the world, and there's no mission that tells you about this. But it's a cool discovery, and finding this on your own feels so rewarding. That highlights one of the best parts of any adventure game, that sense of discovery, finding something unique just by wandering around without any guidance or help. Type-0 has so many caves and cities that you'll wander into and go, why is this here? Is this important? And almost all of this is related to side quests, not story progression. Mostly forgettable fetch quests, but the expert trials are great. This is a true adventure game, and that embodies the soul of Final Fantasy more than fancy graphics, crystals, summons, familiar names, and enemies. All of that is superficial. Since the first Final Fantasy, this series has been about assembling a ragtag team and going on an adventure. In that sense, Type-0 is more deserving of mainline status than the most recent mainline entry. By calling this Type-0, refusing to localize it at the time, then sending it off to die with a hideous, quote, HD port years later, Square did a disservice to this game. Type-0 HD's selling point was that it came bundled with a demo for Final Fantasy XV. What's ironic is the game I had great expectations for wound up being a huge disappointment, and the game I bought just to play a demo is still fun over a decade later.